The
But
first
you
thing my
already
son
signed it.
said after my heart
Everything
surgery
is
wasn't,
finalized.
"Mom, are you
There is
okay?"
nothing you
It
can do
was,
now.
"You already signed everything, remember."
As the executor of the
3
estate, I
weeks
have to
later,
inform
I
you that the
sat inside a
previous
lawyer's
arrangements have been
office, my
challenged.
hands
We
still
need to
shaking
discuss
from
the
recovery,
implications.
while my son
We've been
Marcus
over this
and my
countless
daughter
times.
Ashley
Without
waited
any
for me
further
to surrender the
documentation, the
home their
terms of the
father and
settlement
I
are
had
clear.
built
My client is
over
not obligated
34
to pay, and
years.
frankly, I suggest you
Their
advise your...
attorney smiled. My children looked relieved. They believed the new will was already finished. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a faded receipt no bigger than a grocery bill, and placed it on the table. The lawyer stopped talking. Marcus turned pale. And for the first time since my surgery, I realized my family had forgotten one very important thing. I was still paying attention. If this story touches something in your heart, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes these stories easier to tell. Please share how you would feel in my place. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can spend more evenings together. My name is Brianna Green, and until a few months ago, I believed my greatest fear was losing my health. I was wrong. My greatest fear turned out to be discovering that the people I loved most had already begun counting what would belong to them after I was gone. I am 64 years old, a retired nurse, and for more than 3 decades, I lived in the same brick house outside Atlanta, Georgia. My husband Robert and I bought it when Marcus was 8 and Ashley was 5. The house wasn't large by today's standards. It had 3 bedrooms, a small front porch, and a backyard where Robert planted dogwood trees every spring. To most people, it was simply property. To me, it was my entire life. Every corner carried a memory. The stain near the dining room window came from the Thanksgiving, when Marcus dropped an entire pitcher of sweet tea. The scratches on the kitchen cabinets were from Ashley riding her little toy horse through the hallway. Even the creaking staircase held memories of Christmas mornings when the children would race downstairs before sunrise. Robert used to say that houses absorb the voices of the people who live inside them. If that was true, our house was full of laughter. Robert worked for the city water department. I spent nearly 30 years working as a nurse at a local hospital. We were never wealthy people. We paid our bills, saved what we could, and sacrificed when necessary. There were years when we worried about mortgage payments, and years when we worked overtime just to keep the children in decent schools. But we always believed we were building something together. When Robert died 4 years earlier after a short battle with pancreatic cancer, I thought the hardest chapter of my life had already been written. I remember sitting beside his hospital bed during his final week. He squeezed my hand and said, "Promise me you'll keep living in our house as long as you want." I promised him. At the time, I never imagined I would eventually have to defend that promise against our own children. For the first year after Robert died, Marcus and Ashley were wonderful. Marcus called every Sunday. Ashley brought casseroles. My granddaughter Chloe visited often and helped me tend Robert's garden. Those visits became the brightest part of my week, but slowly, almost so slowly that I didn't recognize it at first, the conversations began to change. Marcus started asking questions. At first, they seemed harmless. "Mom, have you updated your insurance? Do you still have Dad's paperwork? Where do you keep your important documents?" As a former nurse, I understood practical concerns. I answered his questions because I trusted him. Ashley was gentler. She would hold my hand and say things like, "You shouldn't have to handle everything by yourself anymore." I believed she was worried about me. Looking back now, I wonder exactly when concern became curiosity, and curiosity became calculation. Marcus worked in sales. He had always been ambitious, even as a boy. He wanted the best cars, the biggest house, the newest electronics. His wife Lauren shared those ambitions. She was polished, organized, and always spoke about finances as if life were a business transaction. Ashley was different. She had always been emotional and kind-hearted. She married Mark Reynolds, a real estate agent who seemed charming at first. Mark could walk into any room and make people laugh. But he also had a habit of evaluating everything by its market value. One afternoon, while standing on my back porch, Mark looked across my yard. "This neighborhood has really exploded," he said. I smiled politely. "It has changed." He nodded. "This property alone is probably worth much more than you realize." At the time, I thought he was simply making conversation. Now I understand he was measuring something. Over the next year, similar comments appeared more often. Marcus talked about estate planning. Lauren mentioned how difficult it could be for families to settle assets. Mark discussed real estate prices. Ashley worried about me living alone. None of those subjects seemed dangerous by themselves. Together, they created a feeling I couldn't explain. Sometimes, after family dinners when everyone had gone home, I would sit in Robert's old recliner and stare at the living room. I would ask myself a question that made me feel guilty. Were my children worried about me, or were they worried about what would happen to the house? I hated myself for even thinking it. Good mothers don't question their children. At least that's what I had always believed. The only person who seemed completely unchanged was Chloe. At 16, she still sat beside me in the garden and listened to my stories about her grandfather. She helped me bake pies. She asked about my nursing career. She cared about things that weren't worth money. One afternoon, she said, "Grandma, this house feels safe." I remember smiling. "Your grandfather built that feeling." She looked around the backyard. "I hope it never changes." Neither did I. Then 6 months ago, I began experiencing chest pain. At first, I ignored it. Nurses make terrible patients. I convinced myself it was stress grief or simply aging. But after several tests and appointments, my cardiologist gave me news I didn't expect. I needed surgery. The procedure wasn't considered extremely dangerous, but it wasn't minor either. Recovery would take time. There were risks because of my age. When I told Marcus, he immediately began asking questions. "Who's taking you to appointments? Who's handling your bills? What happens if you need rehabilitation afterward?" Ashley cried. Lauren offered to help organize paperwork. Mark suggested I think about long-term plans. Everyone suddenly became deeply interested in my future. At first, I felt grateful. After all, wasn't this exactly what families were supposed to do? But one evening, after everyone had left, I walked through the house, turning off lights. I stopped in Robert's old office. His reading glasses still sat on the desk. The old clock still ticked. His photograph still stood beside the lamp. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly felt afraid. Not of surgery, not of dying, but of what might happen if I became too weak to protect myself. That night, before going to bed, I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The dogwood trees Robert planted were beginning to bloom. And somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. Pay attention, because not everyone who says they're helping you is protecting you. A week later, my doctor scheduled my surgery. And my children became far more interested in my future than they had ever been before. After my cardiologist scheduled the surgery, my entire family suddenly became very interested in my future. At first, I told myself I should feel grateful. Many women my age sit alone in hospital waiting rooms. Many spend holidays without phone calls. Many would give anything to have children who seem concerned. So when Marcus began calling every other day, I tried to appreciate it. When Ashley started bringing dinner twice a week, I thanked her. When Lauren arrived with folders and notebooks saying she wanted to help organize my paperwork, I assumed she was being thoughtful. But sometimes, the difference between love and control is only visible after you look backward. One Tuesday afternoon, Marcus came over after work. He carried a leather briefcase, something I had only ever seen him bring to business meetings. I was sitting at the kitchen table paying my electric bill. He placed several documents beside me. "Mom, we should probably get some things in order before surgery." I looked down. Medical authorization forms, emergency contact forms, financial power of attorney documents. I felt my stomach tighten. I don't think we need all of this right now. Marcus sat down beside me. "It's just precautionary. If something happens during surgery, somebody has to make decisions." I understood that. As a nurse, I had explained similar forms to hundreds of patients. Still, something felt rushed. "I'd like to read them carefully." He smiled, though his expression seemed strained. Of course. When he left, the papers remained on my kitchen table like unwelcome guests. That evening, Ashley arrived. She made tea and sat beside me. "You know Marcus is only trying to help." "I know. He worries about you." I nodded. "I worry about myself too." Ashley reached for my hand. "You shouldn't have to deal with everything alone anymore." The words sounded kind. Yet I noticed she glanced toward the stack of papers several times. The following weekend, Lauren came over carrying color-coded folders. She had always been extremely organized. "I thought we could make things easier for you," she said. Inside the folders were labels: insurance, banking, property, investments, bills. She asked where I kept my tax returns, where Robert's retirement information was stored, whether the house was completely paid off. I answered some questions, others I avoided. At one point, she said almost casually, "A lot of older people put a child's name on their property. It makes everything easier." I looked up. "For whom?" She smiled. "For everyone." That night, I barely slept. I walked through the house after midnight. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. The refrigerator hummed softly. The house felt alive, yet strangely vulnerable. I stopped outside Robert's office. His chair still sat beside the desk. I had never moved it. I sat there in the darkness and imagined what Robert would say. He had always trusted people until they gave him a reason not to. I had inherited that quality from him. Perhaps that was why what happened next hurt so much. 3 days later, Mark invited me to lunch. Ashley couldn't come because of work, so he said he wanted to check on me himself. We met at a small restaurant near my neighborhood. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Then, he began talking about real estate. "The market around your area is unbelievable right now." I smiled politely. "I suppose that's good for younger people buying homes?" He laughed. "Actually, it's good for people who already own them." He pulled out his phone. He showed me recent sales, properties nearby, prices, appraisals. Some houses had sold for amounts that surprised even me. "Your place could easily bring a very good number." I stirred my coffee. "I'm not selling." "Oh, I know. I'm just saying it's smart to know your options." His voice sounded friendly, but the conversation left me unsettled. That evening, Chloe came by after school. She found me sitting on the back porch. "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled. "Just thinking." She sat beside me. "I don't like seeing you worried." I looked at her. At 16, she still possessed the honesty adults often lose. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Has your father been talking about my house?" She looked uncomfortable. "A little." "What does he say?" She hesitated. Finally, she spoke quietly. "He says the neighborhood is worth a fortune now." My chest tightened. "Anything else?" She stared at the grass. "He said someday, somebody is going to be very lucky." I forced a smile. "Maybe." But deep inside, I felt something cold. 2 nights later, everything changed. Marcus and Mark stayed behind after dinner. Ashley and Lauren were cleaning dishes. I went upstairs to get my sweater. As I reached the hallway, I realized I had left my reading glasses downstairs. I started back toward the kitchen. Then I heard voices from the back patio. Marcus. Mark. I stopped. I wasn't trying to listen, but then I heard my own name. "How much do you think it could sell for?" Marcus asked. Mark answered, "Depending on the market, probably enough to change a lot of things." There was a pause. Marcus spoke again. "The timing matters." "What do you mean? The surgery?" My heart began pounding. Mark lowered his voice. "If she's recovering, she'll depend on you." "Exactly." Another silence. Then Marcus said words I will never forget. "If we wait too long, she'll change her mind." I stood completely still. The air felt thin. I wanted to walk outside. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to scream. Instead, I quietly returned upstairs. For nearly an hour, I sat on my bed, staring at the wall. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps I misunderstood. Perhaps. But mothers know their children. And something inside me finally admitted the truth. My son was not discussing my future. He was discussing my vulnerability. The next morning, I called an old friend from the hospital. She recommended an estate attorney named Elaine Carter. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Elaine had helped Robert years earlier with several legal documents. I called her office. The receptionist offered me an appointment for Friday. I accepted. I told nobody. Not Marcus. Not Ashley. Not even Denise. Friday morning, I drove downtown alone. Elaine greeted me warmly. She remembered Robert. She remembered our family. When she asked why I had come, I sat quietly for several seconds. Then I said something that made my own voice tremble. "I think my children may be planning my life after surgery before I've even had it." Elaine listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished speaking, she folded her hands. "Brianna," she said gently, "sometimes people reveal themselves when they believe someone has become vulnerable." I looked down at my hands. "What should I do?" Elaine opened a file. "First, we make sure your voice remains yours." Before I left that afternoon, she handed me several documents. After I paid the filing fees, her assistant gave me a small receipt. Nothing special. White paper, black ink. The kind of receipt most people throw away. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse. For reasons I could not explain, I felt that piece of paper mattered. When I arrived home, I opened Robert's old Bible. Inside were family photographs, dried flowers from our anniversary, and one of Robert's handwritten notes. I placed the receipt between the pages. Then I closed the Bible. Downstairs, I heard Marcus's truck pull into the driveway. As I walked toward the stairs, I suddenly realized something. For the first time in my life, I was hiding something from my own children. And I hated the fact that it felt necessary. I barely slept after my meeting with Elaine Carter. For the first time in my life, I had spoken aloud something I had been afraid to admit even to myself. I was afraid of my own children. Not because I thought they would hurt me physically, not because I believed they wanted me dead, but because I had started to suspect that they were waiting for me to become weak enough to surrender decisions I had always made for myself. The following Monday morning, I returned to Elaine's office. Downtown Atlanta was busy with people rushing to work, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, living ordinary lives. Sitting in traffic, I wondered how many older women felt exactly as I did. How many mothers were afraid to say they felt pressured by their own families. Elaine greeted me warmly. She had silver hair, calm eyes, and the kind of voice that made people feel safe. During my nursing years, I had met doctors who could calm patients simply by entering a room. Elaine had the same gift. She poured coffee for both of us. "Brianna, tell me exactly what worries you." I took a deep breath. "It's not one thing." "Then tell me all of it." So I did. I told her about Marcus bringing financial documents. I told her about Lauren asking questions about the house. I described Mark discussing property values. I repeated the conversation I had overheard on the back patio. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands together. "Have they asked you to change your will?" "Not directly." "Have they pressured you to sign anything?" "Not yet." She nodded. "Then right now, we aren't dealing with a legal problem. We're dealing with a concern." I looked down. I feel guilty even sitting here. "Why?" "Because they're my children." Elaine leaned forward. "Brianna, loving your children does not require surrendering your judgment." Those words stayed with me. For years after Robert died, I had tried to avoid burdening my children. I never discussed my loneliness. I never mentioned how quiet the house felt. I never told them how often I still reached toward Robert's side of the bed during the night. I wanted them to live their own lives. Perhaps because of that, I had failed to notice when concern slowly became entitlement. Elaine opened a folder. "Tell me about your current estate plan." Robert and I had prepared a simple will years earlier. Everything passed to the surviving spouse. After both of us died, the assets would be divided between Marcus and Ashley. Nothing unusual. Nothing complicated. Elaine reviewed the paperwork. "When was this last updated?" "About 8 years ago." She nodded. "Your circumstances have changed." I knew she was right. Robert was gone. I was facing surgery. The children were older. The relationships had changed. Still, I hesitated. "I don't want to punish my children." Elaine smiled gently. "Protecting yourself is not punishment." The room became very quiet. For years I had confused those two ideas. She explained something I had never fully understood. "A will only speaks after death," she said. "But a trust can protect you while you're alive." She described a living trust. She explained that I could place the house inside the trust while maintaining complete control over it. I would still live there. I would still make every decision. Nothing would change during my lifetime, but the property would be protected from unauthorized actions. She also recommended something else. "If you undergo surgery, any major changes afterward should only occur if you're clearly competent and making decisions voluntarily." As a nurse, I understood exactly what she meant. After surgery, patients receive medication, pain medicine, anxiety medication, sleep medication. People become confused, disoriented, emotional. I had seen families pressure patients before. I simply never imagined I might become one of those patients. "Do you think my children would try something?" Elaine answered carefully. "I think people sometimes behave differently when they believe time is limited." That answer frightened me more than any accusation. For the next 2 hours, we worked quietly. We updated documents. We established protections. We reviewed emergency contacts. Elaine suggested that she hold original copies in her office. I agreed. She also encouraged me to record a short statement confirming my wishes while I was healthy and fully alert. At first, the idea seemed strange. Then I remembered how easily people can question an older person's memory. I agreed to that too. The camera recorded me sitting beside Elaine. I clearly stated my wishes. I wanted to remain in my home. I wanted control over my finances. I wanted no major changes during my recovery. I wanted decisions made only when I was fully capable. When the recording ended, I felt strangely relieved, as if I had finally spoken for myself. Before leaving, I signed several documents. The secretary printed receipts and filing confirmations. I paid the fees. The final receipt contained a file number and the description of services provided. Estate planning, trust filing, document registration. Nothing about the paper seemed important. Elaine handed it to me. "Keep this somewhere safe." I laughed softly. A receipt. Sometimes small things become important. I folded it and placed it carefully inside my purse. Before I left, Elaine asked one final question. "Do your children know you came here?" "No." "Do you intend to tell them?" I thought about Marcus, Ashley, their worried faces, their questions, their pressure. "No." She nodded. "Then keep these conversations private for now." The drive home felt different. For the first time in weeks, I felt less afraid. Not because I planned to fight my children, not because I wanted conflict, but because I realized something important. I still had choices. That evening, Marcus called. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Tired." "Did you rest today?" "A little." There was a pause. "Did you think about those papers?" "Not yet." "We really should get things organized before surgery." "I know." He sighed. "I just don't want anything to happen." Neither did I, but I had started to realize we meant different things. Later that night, Ashley came by. She brought soup. She hugged me. She cried while discussing the surgery. For a moment, I almost believed my fears had been foolish. She sat at the kitchen table. "Mom, if something happened, I don't know what I'd do." I reached for her hand. "Nothing is going to happen." "I know." Her eyes filled with tears. "We just want to help." And perhaps she truly believed that. That is the difficult part about family. People can love you and still hurt you. People can worry about you and still benefit from your weakness. Before bed, I walked into Robert's office. I opened his Bible. The pages smelled faintly of old paper. Inside rested photographs. A dried flower from our 25th anniversary. One of Robert's handwritten notes. And now the folded receipt. I placed it between two pages. I honestly did not know why. Perhaps because it felt connected to Robert. Perhaps because it represented something he would have wanted. Protection. Preparation. Common sense. As I closed the Bible, I looked at Robert's photograph. I hope I'm doing the right thing. The house was silent. Outside, wind moved through the dogwood trees. And somewhere deep inside me, a feeling I could not explain began to grow. Not fear, not anger, something closer to preparation. Because for the first time, I realized my surgery might not be the greatest test waiting for me. My greatest test might come afterward. And the people sitting beside my hospital bed could become the very people I would need protection from. The morning of my surgery arrived with rain. Atlanta skies often turn gray in late autumn, but that morning the clouds felt especially heavy. I stood in my kitchen before sunrise, holding a cup of coffee I wasn't allowed to drink because of the operation. The house was silent. For several minutes, I simply walked from room to room. I touched the dining table Robert had built. I straightened the framed photographs on the mantel. I stood in our bedroom doorway and looked at the empty side of the bed where my husband used to sleep. "Watch over me today," I whispered. At 6 o'clock, Marcus arrived. Ashley came 10 minutes later. Lauren brought coffee. Mark offered to drive. Everyone seemed unusually attentive. For a brief moment, I felt ashamed of my suspicions. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Maybe fear had made me cynical. As we drove toward the hospital, Ashley reached across the back seat and squeezed my hand. "We'll be here the entire time, Mom." I smiled weakly. I know. The hospital felt familiar. After nearly 30 years as a nurse, I had walked those same hallways thousands of times, but being the patient instead of the caregiver felt completely different. Suddenly, every machine sounded louder. Every form felt more serious. Every signature carried more weight. A young nurse reviewed my paperwork. Marcus answered several questions before I could. Ashley explained my medications. Lauren wrote notes. The nurse smiled. "You have a wonderful family." I forced myself to agree. They've been very supportive. Before they took me into pre-op, Marcus leaned close. "Mom, after surgery, just focus on getting better. We'll handle everything else." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they made me uneasy. As the anesthesiologist prepared my medication, my thoughts drifted toward Robert. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was imagining him sitting beside my hospital bed, telling me everything would be all right. Then darkness. When I woke, pain came first. Then confusion. My chest hurt. My throat was dry. The room seemed blurry. Machines beeped somewhere nearby. A nurse noticed I was awake. "You're in recovery, Brianna. Your surgery went well." I tried to speak. My voice barely worked. "Family. They've been waiting." I closed my eyes again. Hours passed. Perhaps longer. Time after surgery becomes strange. Minutes feel like hours. Dreams mix with reality. I remember Marcus sitting beside me. I remember Ashley crying. I remember someone adjusting my blanket. At one point, Lauren handed me water. Another time, Mark stood near the window speaking quietly on his phone. Everything felt distant. The medication left my thoughts floating somewhere between sleep and consciousness. On the second day, the pain medication became stronger. The nurses encouraged me to walk. The physical therapist helped me sit in a chair. Simple tasks became exhausting. Lifting a cup felt difficult. Remembering conversations felt impossible. I knew this state very well. I had cared for patients exactly like myself. That knowledge frightened me, because I understood how vulnerable people become after surgery. One afternoon, Marcus entered carrying several papers. "Mom, we need a couple signatures for insurance." I blinked. "What kind of papers?" "Just some things regarding your care." My head hurt. The room seemed to spin. Ashley stood beside him. "It's nothing important." I reached for my glasses. "I can't read them." Marcus sat down. "We'll explain everything later. Right now, you need to rest." I cannot honestly say whether I signed anything that afternoon. That truth still haunts me. I remember holding a pen. I remember someone turning pages. I remember Ashley saying, "Just here, Mom." But the medication made everything feel underwater. When the nurse entered the room, the papers disappeared. That evening, Denise called. I heard Ashley speaking quietly in the hallway. "She's sleeping." A pause. "No visitors aren't a good idea right now." Another pause. "I'll let her know you called." Denise never came, at least not then. The following morning, I asked for my phone. Marcus smiled. "It's charging." Later, I asked again. "We don't want you stressing yourself," Ashley agreed. "Just focus on healing." As a nurse, I had encouraged patients to rest. As a patient, I began to realize how easily care can become control. By the fourth day, I noticed something else. My children spent a surprising amount of time discussing matters that had nothing to do with my recovery. Bills, accounts, paperwork, the house. One evening I woke during the middle of the night. The hallway light shone beneath the door. Voices drifted into the room. Marcus, Mark. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. "The timing works." We need everything finished before she gets stronger. My heart began pounding. I shifted slightly in bed. The movement caused pain. The voices stopped. A few moments later, Marcus entered. "Mom, are you okay?" I forced a smile. I heard voices. "Mark and I were just talking." "About what?" He hesitated. "Your recovery." I wanted to believe him. Instead, I turned my head toward the window. The next afternoon, Chloe visited. She walked into my room carrying flowers. The moment I saw her, I began to cry. She hugged me gently. "I was worried about you." "I'm okay," but she looked uncertain. She sat beside me while Ashley went to get coffee. For several minutes, we talked normally. School, friends, the garden. Then Chloe lowered her voice. "Grandma?" "Yes?" She looked toward the hallway. "I think you should get better before making big decisions." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" She looked frightened. "I don't know." "Chloe," she swallowed. "I heard people arguing." "Who?" She looked down. "Mom and Uncle Marcus." "What were they saying?" "I don't know exactly." She hesitated. "Something about papers." Before she could continue, Ashley returned. The conversation ended. That night, I lay awake. The ceiling lights cast shadows across the room. My chest hurt. My body felt weak. But something much deeper hurt even more. Trust. I remembered Elaine's warning. People sometimes reveal themselves when they believe someone has become vulnerable. On my 6th day in the hospital, Marcus sat beside me. He seemed relaxed, confident. "Everything is under control." "What is?" He smiled. "The important things." I studied his face. The same boy I had once held during thunderstorms. The same little boy who used to crawl into our bed after nightmares. Yet now I could no longer understand what he was thinking. The day before my discharge, I overheard something that changed everything. I had awakened earlier than usual. Marcus stood outside my room speaking to Mark. His voice was low, but not low enough. "By the time she gets home, everything will already be settled." Mark answered. "Good." I closed my eyes immediately. I heard footsteps. The door opened. Marcus walked inside. He smiled. "Good morning, Mom." I looked at him. For the first time in my life, I wondered if my son believed I had already become too weak to notice what was happening around me. And lying there in that hospital bed, exhausted and hurting, I made a silent promise to myself. I would recover. I would pay attention. And before I signed another piece of paper, I would remember exactly who I was. I was not simply a patient. I was not simply an elderly widow. And I was not yet finished protecting the life Robert and I had built together. Coming home should have felt comforting. For 34 years, my house had been the place where pain became manageable. When Robert had the flu, we recovered there. When the children came home crying after difficult days at school, we sat at the kitchen table and talked there. After Robert died, those walls carried me through grief. But the afternoon I returned from the hospital, I felt like a guest entering someone else's home. Marcus drove me. Ashley sat beside me. The ride was quiet. I expected relief when we turned onto my street, but instead, I felt nervous. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed two things immediately. Mark's truck was parked beside the garage, and several cardboard boxes sat near the front porch. "What's all this?" I asked. Marcus answered quickly. "We've been organizing things." I was too tired to argue. Walking from the car to the front door exhausted me. My chest still hurt. My breathing felt shallow. The doctor had warned me that recovery would take time. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The living room looked different. Robert's chair had been moved. Several framed photographs had disappeared from the shelves. The small table beside the front window was gone. Ashley noticed me looking around. We just tried to make things safer. For whom? I asked. She smiled nervously. For you. Marcus helped me toward the staircase, then he stopped. We moved your bedroom downstairs. I looked at him. What? It's temporary. I sleep upstairs. You can't climb stairs right now. Part of me knew he was correct. The doctor had warned against overexertion, but nobody had asked me. Nobody had discussed it. My bedroom downstairs was the old guest room. My clothes had been moved. My nightstand sat against a different wall. Even Robert's photograph had been placed beside the bed. Everything looked neat, organized, and completely unfamiliar. Ashley adjusted my blankets. We thought this would be easier. I wanted to tell her that ease and comfort are not the same thing. Instead, I simply nodded. Over the next several days, I noticed small changes everywhere. Robert's office door remained closed. The filing cabinet had been moved. Several drawers in the kitchen had been rearranged. The mail no longer sat on the dining room table. Even the checkbook had disappeared from the kitchen drawer where I had kept it for years. One afternoon, I asked Marcus, "Where's the mail?" "I've been sorting it." "Why? So you don't have to worry." "I've handled my own mail for 40 years. He sighed. "Mom, you're recovering." His voice carried patience, but also irritation, as if I were being unreasonable. Lauren visited frequently. She brought groceries, prepared meals, medication schedules. She seemed helpful, yet she also said things that unsettled me. One afternoon, she stood in the living room looking around. "This house is really too much for one person." I said nothing. She continued. "Imagine how much easier life could be in a smaller place." Ashley immediately changed the subject, but I noticed she didn't disagree. A few days later, Mark arrived carrying a measuring tape. I watched him from my chair. "What are you measuring?" He smiled. "Just curiosity." "About what? Property values?" I stared at him. "Inside my house." He laughed awkwardly. "Occupational habit." Marcus spoke before I could answer. "Mark's just helping us understand options." I looked directly at my son. "What options?" Nobody answered. That silence frightened me more than any argument could have. My recovery progressed slowly. Walking remained painful. Sleeping was difficult. My emotions felt close to the surface. Sometimes I cried for no reason. Other times, I sat quietly staring at Robert's photograph. I missed him terribly. Not only because I loved him, but because he had always been the one person who protected me. Without him, I felt exposed. One morning, I asked for my bank statements. Marcus looked surprised. "Why, I want to review my accounts. I've already handled everything." "I didn't ask if you handled it." The room became quiet. Ashley lowered her eyes. Marcus folded his arms. "You signed paperwork giving me permission." My heart began beating faster. "What paperwork?" "At the hospital." "I don't remember that." He sighed heavily. "You were awake." "I was medicated." Ashley finally spoke. "Mom, we were trying to help." I looked at her. What exactly did I sign? Neither of them answered immediately. That frightened me, because if the documents were innocent, why hesitate? That afternoon, I tried to access my online banking account. The password no longer worked. I tried again. Nothing. Marcus noticed. "Oh, I changed it." My hands froze. "You what?" You kept forgetting passwords. I've used that password for years. He shrugged. I thought it was safer. Safer. Everyone suddenly seemed very concerned about safety. Safer to move my room. Safer to handle my finances. Safer to control my mail. Safer to change passwords. Yet somehow none of those decisions involved me. That evening, after everyone had left, I walked slowly through the house. My chest ached with every step. I stopped outside Robert's office. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room looked different. Several files were missing. His desk drawers had been opened. A folder cabinet stood slightly ajar. I felt physically cold. Someone had been searching. The question was obvious. Searching for what I sat in Robert's chair. My eyes fell upon the bookshelf. The Bible. The same Bible where I had hidden the receipt. My breathing became shallow. For several terrible seconds, I feared it might be gone. I opened the cover. Family photographs, dried flowers, Robert's note, and finally the folded receipt. Still there. I closed my eyes. Relief washed through me. For reasons I still couldn't explain, that little piece of paper had become deeply important. Almost like a promise to myself. A reminder that before surgery, while my mind was clear, I had taken steps to protect my voice. As I returned the Bible to the shelf, footsteps appeared behind me. Marcus stood in the doorway. "What are you doing?" His voice sounded casual, but his eyes immediately moved toward the bookshelf. "Just sitting." "You should be resting." I was. He stepped into the room. "I've been trying to make things easier for you." I looked at him carefully. "When did I ask you to take over my life?" His expression changed. "You didn't." "Then why does it feel like you have—" For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said something that hurt more than I expected. "You don't understand how difficult this is for us." Us. Not me. Not the woman recovering from heart surgery. Not the widow trying to regain her strength. Them. I looked at my son and suddenly realized that somewhere along the way, my illness had become their situation. My weakness had become their opportunity. Marcus left the room without another word. That night, I lay awake downstairs in the guest room. The house felt unfamiliar. The sounds felt different. Even the shadows looked strange. At around midnight, I heard voices in the kitchen. Marcus, Lauren, very quiet. I couldn't understand everything, but I heard one sentence clearly. "Once everything is official, she'll have to accept it." Official. The word repeated inside my mind. What exactly had become official? What had I signed? What decisions had already been made while I lay in a hospital bed, unable to think clearly? The next morning, I slowly climbed the stairs while nobody was home. The effort exhausted me. My chest hurt. My legs trembled. But I reached Robert's office. I opened the Bible again. I touched the folded receipt, and for the first time since my surgery, I realized something important. Whatever my children believed they had accomplished, they did not know about Elaine. They did not know about the trust. And they did not know about the little piece of paper hidden inside Robert's Bible. As I carefully returned it to its place, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Marcus. I closed the Bible. And for the first time in my life, I found myself hiding evidence from my own son. 3 weeks after my surgery, Marcus announced that we needed a family meeting. The words alone made my stomach tighten. We'll keep it simple, he said over breakfast. I looked up from my tea. About what? Some paperwork. Ashley stood at the kitchen counter, avoiding my eyes. Lauren sat quietly scrolling through her phone. No one looked comfortable. That frightened me. Because when families avoid eye contact, the truth is usually standing somewhere nearby. What paperwork? I asked again. Marcus sighed. Mom, we've already talked about this. No, you've talked. I've listened. His jaw tightened. We just need to finalize things. The word finalize stayed with me all morning. Finalize what my recovery had improved enough that I could move around the house slowly without assistance. I still tired easily, but my thoughts had become clearer every day. And the clearer my mind became, the more disturbed I felt. At 2 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in a gray suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. Marcus opened the front door before the man even reached the porch. Mom, this is Grant Whitaker. The man smiled professionally. It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Green. I remained seated. I don't believe we've met before. Marcus answered for him. Grant has been helping us. Us. Again. Not me. Not our family. Us. Grant sat across from me in the living room. Ashley took the couch. Lauren sat beside Marcus. Mark arrived 10 minutes later carrying coffee. The entire situation felt strangely organized, almost rehearsed. Grant opened his briefcase. I understand you've had some health challenges recently. I had surgery. He nodded sympathetically. And your children have been very concerned. I looked at Marcus. He avoided my eyes. Grant removed several documents. As families age, it's often helpful to update estate planning documents. My heartbeat quickened. I already have an attorney. The room became quiet. Marcus finally spoke. Elaine Carter is outdated. I turned toward him. Outdated? Her documents are old. I stared at my son. You've spoken with her? No. Then how would you know? He looked irritated. Grant intervened. Mrs. Green, your family simply wanted to ensure your wishes were protected. My wishes. He slid a document across the table. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then I saw my name. My signature. My heart stopped. What is this? Grant spoke calmly. A revised will. I looked up. I never revised my will. Marcus folded his arms. Yes, you did. I looked back down. The document stated that Marcus would serve as primary executor. Ashley would share authority regarding major decisions. The family home could be sold if my health prevented independent living. Several financial decisions could be made by my children. I felt physically cold. This isn't right. Ashley finally spoke. Mom. No. I looked directly at her. When did this happen? Marcus answered. In the hospital. The room suddenly felt smaller. The hospital? You signed everything. I was recovering. You understood. No, Marcus. I could hear my own heartbeat. I don't remember this. Grant adjusted his glasses. The documents appear properly signed. Appear? Such a careful word. Lauren finally entered the conversation. We've all been worried about you. I looked at her. Worried enough to rewrite my will. She looked away. Mark spoke next. This isn't about money. I almost laughed. Then I realized nobody else was smiling. Grant continued speaking. The purpose is to make sure your affairs are managed efficiently. My affairs have been managed for 64 years. Marcus leaned forward. Mom, this house is too much for you. There it was. Finally. The house. I looked directly at him. So that's what this is? No. Then why does the new will discuss selling my home? Ashley began crying. I didn't want this meeting to happen like this. I turned toward her. Then how did you want it to happen? She couldn't answer. Grant opened another folder. There are also updated healthcare documents. I felt dizzy. What documents? Power of attorney. My hands began shaking. I remembered the hospital room, the medication, the blurry pages, the pen. My breathing became shallow. Who brought these papers? Nobody answered. I looked at Ashley. She looked down. I looked at Marcus. He looked angry. Mark stared at the floor. Finally, Grant said, Your son informed me that you wish to make changes. My eyes moved toward Marcus. You told him that. You said you wanted us protected. No. My voice grew stronger. I said I wanted my family to be okay. That's what this does. No. I stood slowly. Pain shot through my chest. Ashley immediately rose. Mom, sit down. I remained standing. This house belongs to me. Marcus sighed heavily. You can't handle it anymore. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, not my strength. Something deeper. The belief that my son still saw me as his mother. When did you decide that? I asked quietly. His answer came too quickly. After surgery. After surgery, when I was medicated, weak, confused, dependent. Grant looked uncomfortable. As your attorney. You are not my attorney. The room became silent. I never hired you. Marcus spoke sharply. We hired him. Exactly. We, not me. I sat back down because my body could no longer support me. For several moments, nobody spoke. The clock ticked. Cars passed outside. The dogwood branches moved gently beyond the window. My entire life sat around me. The family photographs, Robert's books, our wedding picture. And suddenly, I understood something. They had not simply prepared for my death. They had prepared for my weakness. Grant looked at his documents. The signatures appear consistent. I heard that sentence, but something inside me focused on one detail. The date. I looked carefully. The papers had been signed 3 days after my surgery. 3 days. At that time, I had barely been able to hold a cup of water. I remembered pain medication, confusion, hallucinations, nurses helping me walk. I looked up. This was 3 days after surgery. Marcus answered immediately. You were awake. I was medicated. You understood. I stared at him. Did I? Ashley started crying harder. Mark looked uncomfortable. Even Grant seemed uncertain. For the first time, doubt appeared on his face. I suddenly remembered something Elaine had told me. Any major changes after surgery should occur only when you are clearly competent. The memory returned like light entering a dark room. And somewhere upstairs, hidden inside Robert's Bible, rested a small, folded receipt. The only proof that before my surgery, while my mind was clear, I had already made my own decisions. Grant gathered several papers. We don't need to decide everything today. Marcus looked surprised. What do you mean? Grant hesitated. Mrs. Green appears concerned. Concerned. Such a polite word for betrayal. I looked at my son. The boy whose fevers I had treated, whose lunches I had packed, whose nightmares I had comforted. and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, fear that I might remember, fear that I might fight, fear that I might still be stronger than he expected. The meeting ended awkwardly. Mark left first. Lauren followed. Grant packed his briefcase. Ashley remained seated, crying quietly. Marcus stood near the window. As Grant reached the door, I asked one final question. "What day did you first meet my son?" He looked surprised. "About a month ago. Before my surgery." The room suddenly became perfectly still. Marcus looked away, and at that moment, I realized something far worse than betrayal. This had not happened because I became weak. It had begun before I ever entered the operating room. After Grant Whitaker left, the house felt colder. The sun had already begun setting behind the dogwood trees, casting long shadows across the living room. Ashley quietly collected coffee cups. Lauren avoided looking at me. Mark left without saying goodbye. Only Marcus remained. He stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, "When did you first start planning this?" He looked up. "Planning what?" "The new will." His expression hardened. "We weren't planning against you." "Then why did you meet an attorney before my surgery?" He said nothing. That silence answered more than words ever could. Ashley suddenly stood. "Please stop fighting." I turned toward her. "I'm not fighting. I'm asking questions." Tears filled her eyes. "We were scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you." I wanted desperately to believe her. Part of me still did. But another part, the part that had spent 30 years caring for patients and watching families during medical crises, understood that fear sometimes creates selfish decisions, and sometimes greed hides behind concern. That evening, everyone left except Ashley. She insisted on staying overnight. I was too exhausted to argue. After dinner, I slowly climbed the stairs for the first time in weeks. The effort left me breathless, but I wanted to sit inside my own bedroom. The room smelled faintly of Robert's cologne. I had not slept there since before surgery. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked at his photograph. "What would you do?" I whispered. The room offered no answers, only memories. An hour later, Ashley entered quietly. "Can I sit?" I nodded. She sat beside me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Marcus thinks you're angry because you don't trust us." I looked at my daughter. "I'm angry because I don't understand what happened." She lowered her eyes. "He was worried. Worried enough to change my will." Her voice trembled. "He thought if something happened, everything would become complicated." I studied her face. Ashley had never been a good liar. Even as a child, guilt appeared in her eyes immediately. "Did you agree with him?" She didn't answer. "Did you?" She wiped away tears. I didn't know what to do. Those words broke my heart, not because of what they meant, but because they confirmed what I already feared. She had gone along with Marcus, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps out of fear, but she had still participated. After she went downstairs, I remained alone in the bedroom. Then I made a decision. The following morning, while everyone was occupied in the kitchen, I called Elaine Carter. She answered personally. "Brianna." I almost cried hearing her voice. "I need to see you." "Is everything all right?" "No." She became quiet. "Can you come this afternoon?" "I think so." "Come alone." At noon, I told Ashley I had a doctor's appointment. She seemed surprised. Should I drive you? No. Marcus can come. I'll manage. For the first time since my surgery, I drove alone. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, partly because of weakness, mostly because of fear. When I arrived at Elaine's office, I felt as if I could finally breathe. She immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? I told her everything: the family meeting, the attorney, the documents, the hospital signatures, the revised will. Marcus meeting the attorney before surgery. Elaine listened carefully. When I finished, she remained silent for several moments. Then she asked one question. Do you remember signing those documents? No. Do you remember understanding them? No. She nodded slowly. As I warned you, capacity can become an issue after major surgery. I felt tears filling my eyes. My own son. Elaine handed me a tissue. This isn't your fault. I looked down. I feel foolish. No. She spoke firmly. You trusted your children. For several minutes, we reviewed everything. The trust documents, the recording I had made before surgery, the dates, the paperwork. Then Elaine asked something important. Do you still have the receipt? I looked up. The receipt, the one from the day we finalized your trust. Suddenly, I remembered the folded paper inside Robert's Bible. Yes. Good. Why does it matter? She opened my file. The timestamp matters. I didn't understand. She pointed to the filing date. 3 weeks before my surgery. The trust had been established while I was healthy, mentally competent, fully aware. The legal documents had already been filed. The receipt proved the exact date. My breathing slowed. Are you saying they can't change it? Elaine folded her hands. I'm saying your wishes were documented before surgery. For the first time in weeks, hope entered the room. She continued. If anyone attempts to argue that you wanted different arrangements after surgery, we have evidence that your intentions were already clearly established. My eyes widened. The receipt, she nodded. Sometimes very small pieces of paper become very important. Suddenly, I understood. The receipt was not simply proof of payment, it was proof of timing. Proof that before anesthesia, before medication, before confusion, before weakness, I had already spoken for myself. I almost laughed. For weeks, I had protected that little piece of paper without fully understanding why. Some instinct had told me it mattered. Perhaps Robert would have called it common sense. Perhaps God would call it protection. Before I left, Elaine gave me one final piece of advice. Don't confront them yet. I looked surprised. Why? Because they still believe they're in control. The drive home felt very different. For the first time since surgery, I no longer felt powerless. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to punish my children, but because I finally understood something. The truth was already waiting, and it had been waiting since before my operation. When I arrived home, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table. Where were you? Out. His expression tightened. You should have told somebody. I'm 64 years old. We were worried. I looked at him carefully. Worried about what? He didn't answer. That evening, Chloe came over. She sat beside me on the back porch. The autumn air felt cool. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. She studied my face. You seem different. I do, she nodded. You don't look scared anymore. I smiled softly. Maybe she was right. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, I suddenly realized something important. Marcus still believed the revised documents would eventually stand. Grant Whitaker still believed I had willingly signed them. Ashley still believed everything could somehow be fixed quietly. And none of them knew that long before my surgery, I had already made another choice, a choice hidden inside Robert's Bible, protected by a faded receipt, a simple piece of paper no larger than a grocery bill. The very piece of paper that one day soon would make an entire room fall silent. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. For several minutes, I lay quietly in the downstairs guest room, listening to the house. The refrigerator hummed. A branch scraped softly against the window. Somewhere upstairs, one of the old floorboards creaked as the house settled. For the first time since my surgery, I wasn't afraid. I was sad. There is a difference. Fear makes your heart race. Sadness makes your heart feel heavy. I had spent weeks feeling frightened of what my children might do. Now I was grieving what they had already done. At breakfast, Marcus acted as if the previous afternoon had never happened. He poured coffee, read his phone, asked whether I had taken my medication. Ashley looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Lauren remained unusually quiet. No one mentioned Grant Whitaker. No one mentioned the revised will. The silence itself felt suspicious. Marcus finally spoke. "We should probably schedule another meeting." I looked up. "Why?" "So we can finish everything." I folded my napkin. "Nothing is being finished?" His expression hardened. "Mom." "No." The room became still. Ashley stared at her plate. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "You don't understand what happens when people get older." I almost smiled. "I'm 64, Marcus, not 94. You just had heart surgery." "And I survived it." Lauren finally entered the conversation. "We only want to protect you." I looked directly at her. From what? Nobody answered. After breakfast, Marcus left for work. Lauren followed. Ashley remained upstairs. For the first time in weeks, the house felt temporarily mine again. I slowly climbed the stairs. My chest still hurt if I moved too quickly, but my strength had begun returning. I entered Robert's office. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. Dust floated through the air. Everything felt familiar, safe. I removed the Bible from the shelf. Carefully, I opened it. There it was, the folded receipt. I stared at the little piece of paper. White, wrinkled, ordinary. I still found it difficult to believe something so small could matter. Yet Elaine had sounded absolutely certain. Keep it safe. I slipped it into my purse. Then I sat in Robert's chair. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar. I remembered something my husband once told me. Important things are usually boring when they happen. At the time, he had been discussing insurance paperwork. Now I understood. Important moments often look ordinary. A signature, a receipt, a filing date, a conversation. The things people ignore sometimes become the things that save them. At 10 o'clock, Denise called. "How are you?" I hesitated. "Can you drive me somewhere?" "Anywhere?" An hour later, we were driving downtown. I hadn't told Marcus. I hadn't told Ashley. Part of me felt guilty. Another part reminded me that I was a grown woman who did not need permission. Denise looked at me carefully. "You look tired." "I am." "You look angry too." I stared out the window. "I think I'm heartbroken." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Sometimes that's worse." When we arrived at Elaine Carter's office, she was waiting for us. The moment I sat down, I removed the receipt from my purse and placed it on her desk. She picked it up carefully. This is it. The little paper suddenly looked important sitting beneath her office lamp. I watched her open my file. Several folders appeared: documents, dates, records. Elaine adjusted her glasses. Brianna, let's go through this carefully. I nodded. She pointed to the receipt. The date here is 3 weeks before surgery. Yes, the trust filing was completed that day. She opened another document. The property transfer into the trust was recorded. My heart began beating faster. So the house is already inside the trust. I stared at her. What does that mean? It means your house is not controlled by the revised will. For several seconds, I could not speak. The room became perfectly quiet. Denise looked confused. Elaine continued. The trust was established while you were healthy, competent, and fully aware. I swallowed. Marcus doesn't know this. No. Ashley doesn't know. No. What about Grant? I doubt he knows either. I looked down at the receipt. Suddenly, the entire picture became clear. Marcus believed the new will controlled everything. Grant believed he was preparing a legitimate estate revision. Ashley believed they had already changed my future, but they didn't know something important. Before surgery, before medication, before weakness, before confusion, I had already spoken, and my voice had been recorded legally. Elaine reached into another file. There is more. She handed me a copy of the video statement I had recorded. I remembered sitting in that office, healthy, clear-minded, confident. I had stated my wishes. I wanted to remain in my home. I wanted no major decisions made during recovery. I wanted independent evaluation before any significant changes. My eyes filled with tears. I forgot. Elaine smiled gently. That's why we document these things. I shook my head. I can't believe I almost threw that receipt away. She leaned forward. Most people would have. Denise looked at the paper. So this tiny thing proves everything. Elaine nodded. It proves timing. She pointed toward the date. If someone claims Brianna wanted these changes after surgery, we can show that her legal planning occurred before surgery. I looked at the receipt again. The paper had cost only a few dollars to print. Yet suddenly, it felt priceless, because it represented something my children had forgotten. I had been preparing before they began planning. My voice existed before my weakness. Elaine became serious. Now we need to discuss the revised documents. My stomach tightened. Do you think they're fraudulent? She chose her words carefully. I think there are serious concerns. She listed them. The timing, the medication, the lack of independent evaluation, the fact that another attorney had become involved, the changes that benefited family members, the absence of my longtime counsel. Everything sounded worse when spoken aloud. I suddenly felt exhausted. My son did this. Elaine nodded sadly. Yes. I lowered my eyes. I keep hoping there's an explanation. Perhaps there is. What kind? Fear, financial pressure, bad advice. I looked up, but not love. Elaine remained silent. That silence answered my question. Before we left, she said something unexpected. I want everyone together. I looked surprised. Everyone? Marcus, Ashley, Grant Whitaker, and me. Especially you. My pulse quickened. What happens then? She placed the receipt carefully beside my file. Then we find out exactly who knew what. Driving home, I stared out the window. The city passed quietly. Traffic lights, buildings, people living ordinary lives. Denise finally spoke. How do you feel? I thought for a long time. Then I answered honestly. Stronger. Because for weeks I had believed my children had already won. They had the paperwork, the attorney, the signatures, the confidence. But they didn't have the truth. And now I carried that truth inside my purse. A faded receipt, no larger than a grocery bill. The same receipt that had already begun changing everything. And soon, when everyone sat together in one room, it would make people ask questions they never expected to hear. Questions my children believed had already disappeared. Questions that would force them to explain exactly what happened while their mother lay recovering from heart surgery. And for the first time since entering that operating room, I realized something. I was no longer the weakest person in the story. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Elaine Carter asked me to arrive 30 minutes early. She wanted time to review everything one final time before Marcus and the others arrived. I barely slept the night before, not because I was afraid of losing, but because I knew that after this meeting, nothing in my family would ever be the same again. Early Thursday morning, I stood in my bedroom upstairs. For the first time since surgery, I had moved back into my own room. The bed still felt unfamiliar after several weeks away. I looked at Robert's photograph on the dresser. His smile remained exactly the same. Calm, steady. The kind of expression that always made me feel protected. I touched the frame. I wish you were here. But he wasn't, and for the first time in my life, I would have to stand alone against my own children. Denise drove me downtown. Neither of us spoke very much. As the city appeared through the windshield, my stomach tightened. What if this destroys everything? I finally asked. Denise kept her eyes on the road. Brianna, they started destroying things before you even got sick. Her words hurt because they were true. When we arrived at Elaine's office, she was waiting. The conference room was larger than I remembered. A long wooden table stood in the center. Several folders rested beside Elaine's chair. My receipt sat neatly inside one file. Such a small piece of paper. Such enormous consequences. Elaine looked at me carefully. How are you feeling? Nervous. You don't have to argue today. I don't. No. She folded her hands. You only need to tell the truth. That sounded simple. But sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to say. Half an hour later, the others arrived. Marcus entered first. He wore a navy suit. Ashley followed behind him. She looked exhausted. Lauren carried a leather notebook. Mark entered last. And finally, Grant Whitaker walked into the room carrying his briefcase. The moment he saw Elaine, his expression changed. Ms. Carter. Mr. Whitaker. The atmosphere became immediately tense. Marcus looked surprised. What is this? I answered quietly. My attorney. He looked at me. You hired Elaine. No, Marcus. I held his gaze. I never stopped. Silence filled the room. Grant slowly sat down. Elaine opened her file. Thank you all for coming. Marcus crossed his arms. We thought this would be a simple review. Elaine nodded. I imagine you did. The room became very still. She looked directly at Grant. Mr. Whitaker, when did you first meet Marcus Green? Grant hesitated. Approximately 1 month before Mrs. Green's surgery. Marcus immediately spoke. What's the point of this? Elaine ignored him. Who contacted you regarding changes to Brianna Green's estate documents? Grant adjusted his glasses. Marcus did. I heard Ashley quietly inhale. Elaine continued. At that time, had you ever represented Brianna Green? No. Had you spoken to her personally? No. Marcus interrupted. My mother wanted changes. Elaine finally looked at him. When did she communicate those wishes? After surgery. While recovering. Yes. While receiving pain medication. Marcus hesitated. I suppose. Elaine opened another folder. Mr. Whitaker, were you aware that Mrs. Green had already completed estate planning documents before surgery? Grant frowned. No. Marcus looked confused. What documents? Elaine slid the receipt across the table. The room became silent. Grant picked it up. He studied the date, the filing number, the description. I watched his expression change. What is this? Elaine spoke calmly. 3 weeks before surgery, Brianna Green established a living trust. Nobody moved. Ashley stared at me. Marcus looked confused. Mark frowned. Grant continued reading. The property transfer was completed? Yes. The trust was funded? Yes. The original documents are secured in my office. Marcus finally spoke. What does that mean? Elaine looked directly at him. It means the house was no longer controlled by a future will. The silence that followed felt enormous. Marcus blinked. No. Yes. You can't do that. Elaine's voice remained calm. She already did. I looked at my son. For the first time since my surgery, I saw genuine fear. Not concern, not frustration. Fear. Because suddenly he realized something. He had never been in control. Grant looked uncomfortable. Why wasn't I informed? Elaine answered. Because you are not her attorney. Mark leaned forward. So none of this matters. Elaine looked directly at him. Oh, it matters. She opened another folder. The revised documents remain a serious concern. Grant swallowed. What exactly are you suggesting? Elaine spoke carefully. I'm asking questions. She reviewed the timeline. 3 weeks before surgery, Brianna creates the trust. Brianna records her intentions. Brianna confirms she wants to remain in her home. 3 days after surgery, new documents appear. Significant financial changes are proposed. Property decisions suddenly change. New legal representation appears. The contrast was devastating. Grant removed his glasses. Mrs. Green, do you remember signing these documents? I answered honestly. No. Do you remember requesting these changes? No. Do you remember meeting me? No. Marcus suddenly became angry. She was aware. I looked at him. I was recovering. You understood. I was on medication. You knew what you wanted. No, Marcus. My voice became stronger. I knew what I wanted before surgery. Elaine opened another folder. Inside was a transcript of my recorded statement. She handed copies to everyone. Ashley began reading. Her face slowly turned pale. The recording stated clearly I wished to remain in my home. I wanted no major decisions during recovery. I wanted independent evaluation before any changes. Ashley lowered the papers. Oh, God. Marcus looked furious. This proves nothing. Elaine turned toward him. It proves intent. Grant finally spoke. Marcus, why didn't you tell me about these existing documents? Marcus said nothing. Mark shifted in his chair. Lauren stared at the table. For the first time, the confidence that had surrounded them disappeared. Elaine asked another question. Who arranged the signing after surgery? Nobody answered. Ashley began crying. Mark looked away. Grant's expression darkened. He turned toward Marcus. Was Mrs. Green evaluated independently? No. Was her medication status reviewed? No. Was her existing attorney notified? No. The room grew painfully quiet. I suddenly felt very tired. Not physically, emotionally, because this was the moment every mother fears. The moment when denial becomes impossible. Ashley finally spoke. I told him we should wait. Marcus looked at her. Ashley continued crying. Mom was still confused. I closed my eyes. There it was. The truth. Small, fragile, but finally spoken. Grant leaned back in his chair. His confidence had completely disappeared. Elaine folded her hands. At this point, we need to determine whether these documents are simply invalid. She paused. Then she said the words that made everyone freeze. Or whether they may be considered fraudulent. Marcus looked stunned. Ashley covered her mouth. Mark stared at the table. Even Lauren appeared frightened. And as I sat there looking at my children, I realized something heartbreaking. The little receipt had not destroyed my family. It had simply exposed what had already been broken. No one spoke for nearly a full minute after Elaine used the word fraudulent. The conference room suddenly felt much smaller. Marcus stared at the table. Ashley continued crying quietly. Lauren looked frightened. Mark appeared uncomfortable for the first time since I had met him. And Grant Whitaker sat perfectly still, his fingers resting on the edge of his briefcase. I had imagined this moment many times. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Very tired. Because when mothers win against their children, they still lose something. Elaine finally broke the silence. Let's be clear. I'm not accusing anyone of intentional misconduct, but the circumstances surrounding these documents require serious examination. Grant nodded slowly. I agree. Marcus looked at him. What does that mean? Grant took a deep breath. It means these documents may not be enforceable. They're signed. Signatures alone are not enough. The room became quiet again. Ashley wiped her eyes. What happens now? Elaine answered. Nothing changes. She looked directly at me. Brianna remains fully in control of her property finances and healthcare decisions. Marcus immediately stood. This is ridiculous. His voice startled everyone. I've spent weeks helping Mom. I looked at him. Did I ask you to? He turned toward me. You couldn't handle things. I couldn't recover from surgery. You were confused? Exactly. My voice remained calm. I was confused. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because for the first time he heard his own argument. I had been confused. Confused people do not make major legal decisions. Grant finally spoke. Marcus, I need to ask you directly. Did your mother request these changes before surgery? No. Did she request them afterward? She said she wanted us protected. Grant nodded. But did she specifically request these changes? Marcus looked away. No. That single word changed the room. Ashley lowered her head. Lauren closed her eyes. Mark leaned backward in his chair. And I suddenly realized something. Marcus had convinced himself he was helping. Perhaps he had started with good intentions. Perhaps he had allowed fear to become control. Or perhaps he had simply seen an opportunity. Only he knew the answer. Elaine opened another file. Mrs. Green also recorded a statement before surgery. Marcus looked shocked. A recording? Yes? Ashley whispered, Mom. I looked at her. I was afraid. Her eyes filled again. Of us? I couldn't answer immediately, because the truth hurt too much. Eventually I said, of becoming weak. Nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Chloe entered the room. Ashley stood immediately. What are you doing here? Chloe looked nervous. I asked Denise to bring me. Marcus frowned. This isn't the place. Chloe looked directly at her father. I think it is. The room became still. She was only 16, yet suddenly she seemed older than everyone present. She walked toward me. Grandma, are you okay? I took her hand. I'm getting there. She looked around the room. Then she said something none of the adults had been willing to say. Everybody's acting like Grandma already died. No one moved. No one spoke. Chloe continued. She's sitting right here. Ashley began crying harder. Marcus looked away, and for the first time, shame appeared on his face. Grant quietly closed his file. Mark removed his glasses. Lauren stared at the floor. The truth coming from a teenager somehow sounded far more painful than anything Elaine had said. I squeezed Chloe's hand. Thank you. She looked at her father. When Grandpa died, Grandma took care of everybody. Marcus remained silent. Now she's sick and everyone keeps talking about the house. Ashley covered her face. The room felt unbearably heavy. Finally, Marcus spoke. It wasn't about the house. I looked at him. Then what was it? He rubbed his forehead. I was scared. Of what? His voice became quieter. Losing everything. I frowned. What everything? The house. There it was. Finally, the truth. Marcus swallowed. Dad worked his whole life for this place. So did I. I know. Then why did you act like it already belonged to you? He couldn't answer. Ashley finally spoke. We thought if something happened there would be problems. I looked at my daughter. What problems? Money. The word hung in the air. Real, honest, painful. Mark finally admitted what nobody else wanted to say. The market is difficult. Lauren looked embarrassed. Marcus lowered his eyes. Ashley continued. The mortgage on Marcus's house. I looked at my son. The debt? He nodded. The business loan. Everything suddenly made more sense. Not greed alone. Pressure, debt, fear, poor decisions. Still wrong, but human. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I saw not villains. I saw frightened people making terrible choices. Elaine remained quiet. Grant finally spoke. I think we should formally withdraw these documents. Marcus looked shocked. What? The circumstances are problematic. He turned toward me. Mom. No. My voice surprised even me. He stopped. For years, I had been the peacemaker, the forgiving one, the mother who avoided conflict. But not today. You don't get to call me Mom, only when you need something. His eyes filled with tears, something I had not seen since he was a boy. I thought I was helping. No, I spoke softly. You were deciding. The difference mattered. Helping asks. Deciding takes. Ashley moved toward me. I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter. She was crying exactly the way she had cried when Robert died. The same shaking shoulders, the same grief. And suddenly I realized something. She had known this was wrong. Perhaps not from the beginning, but eventually. And she had lacked the courage to stop it. That hurt too, because silence sometimes becomes participation. Elaine gathered her files. The legal matters are straightforward, but the emotional matters were not. Those would take much longer. As everyone slowly prepared to leave, Marcus remained seated. The others moved toward the door. Only he stayed behind. When the room finally emptied, he looked at me. I never wanted to hurt you. I believed him. That was the tragedy. I know. Tears filled his eyes. I thought if we handled everything, you'd be safe. I looked at my son. When your father died, I learned something. He waited. Being protected and being controlled are not the same thing. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. For several seconds, I simply looked at him. The little boy who once held my hand crossing the street. The teenager whose broken heart I had comforted. The man sitting before me. Flawed, scared, wrong. Still my son, but not yet forgiven. As we left Elaine's office, I carried my purse tightly against my side. Inside was the faded receipt, the tiny piece of paper that had exposed everything, the paper that had protected my voice, the paper that had reminded everyone in that room that Brianna Green had never stopped being the owner of her own life. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun to set. For the first time in many weeks, I felt something I thought surgery had taken from me. Strength. Not physical strength, not the strength of youth. Something better. The strength to say no, and the strength to survive hearing the truth. The drive home from Elaine's office was quiet. Denise kept both hands on the steering wheel while Atlanta traffic moved slowly around us. The late afternoon sun reflected against the buildings, and for several miles, neither of us spoke. Finally, Denise glanced at me. Do you want me to stay tonight? I looked out the window. No. Are you sure? I nodded. I need to go home. Home. The word felt different now. For weeks, my own house had felt occupied by other people's decisions. Every room carried tension. Every conversation seemed to circle around my age, my health, or my future. But something had changed. For the first time since surgery, I was walking back into my house with the truth beside me. When Denise pulled into the driveway, Marcus's truck was already there. So was Lauren's car. My stomach tightened. They beat us home, Denise said. I know. She turned off the engine. If you need me, call. I squeezed her hand. I will. As soon as I entered the house, I felt the tension. Marcus stood in the kitchen. Lauren sat at the table. Ashley was near the window. Nobody spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. What exactly happened in that office? I set my purse on the counter. You were there. Elaine manipulated the situation. I looked at him carefully. No, Marcus. She explained the situation. He shook his head. Mom, you don't understand how serious this is. I almost laughed. I think I understand perfectly. His face reddened. We've been trying to help you. By changing my will. By protecting this family. Ashley quietly whispered, Marcus, stop. But he couldn't. For weeks he had believed he was in control. Now that control was slipping away. and frightened people often become angry. The trust changes everything, he said. Yes. You didn't tell us. I didn't have to. His voice became louder. We're your children. And I'm your mother. Silence. I looked at him. You speak as if I owed you my house. I never said that. No. You only met an attorney before my surgery. Ashley closed her eyes. Lauren looked down. Marcus took a step forward. You know I have responsibilities. I stared at him. The mortgage. He froze. The business loan. He looked away. You know about that. I nodded slowly. How much debt? He didn't answer. Lauren finally spoke. It's temporary. I looked at her. How much? Marcus exhaled. Almost 160,000. The room became still. I sat down slowly. For several moments I couldn't speak. All those conversations, the concern, the paperwork, the questions. Suddenly, they looked different. Not better, just clearer. You plan to use my house. Marcus immediately shook his head. No. Then why did Mark speak to investors? Ashley looked up sharply. What? I turned toward her. You didn't know. Mark had apparently shared more with Marcus than with his own wife. Ashley stared at her brother. What investors? Lauren looked terrified. Marcus rubbed his forehead. Nothing was finalized. I felt my heart sink. They had gone further than I imagined, not simply discussing possibilities, planning, preparing, expecting. Ashley stood. You told people? Marcus looked frustrated. I was exploring options. Mom was still in the hospital. The room suddenly exploded. Ashley began crying again. Lauren defended Marcus. He was under pressure. Ashley turned toward her. That doesn't make this okay. For the first time, brother and sister stood on opposite sides, and I realized that the truth was beginning to separate everyone. Marcus pointed toward me. You don't understand what it's like. What? Trying to provide. His voice cracked. Trying to hold everything together. I listened quietly. The business failed. The economy changed. The bills kept coming. He sat heavily in a chair. I thought the house could solve everything. There it was. The sentence nobody had been willing to say. Not mom, not family, the house. I looked around the kitchen. Robert had built the cabinets himself. We celebrated birthdays here, graduations, Christmas mornings. And now it had become a financial solution. Ashley looked devastated. Marcus, she's still alive. He lowered his head. I know. No. Her voice shook. I don't think you do. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Lauren said quietly, we were scared. I looked at her. Scared enough to decide my future, tears appeared in her eyes. We were drowning. I understood financial fear. Robert and I had struggled for years when the children were young. I knew what unpaid bills felt like, but we had never solved our problems by taking from someone else, especially not our parents. Ashley sat beside me. I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter. This time, her apology sounded different. There was no defense, no explanation, only regret. I should have stopped it. I nodded slowly. Yes. She cried harder. I was afraid. Of Marcus. She hesitated. Of losing everything. I looked at her. What exactly were you losing? She couldn't answer because the truth was painful. Nobody had actually lost anything. I was alive, recovering, healing. The future they feared existed only inside their own minds. That evening, Marcus refused to leave. "This is still my family." I looked at him. "Yes." "And I'm staying." "No." He stared at me. "What?" "You need to leave." The words shocked everyone. Perhaps they even shocked me, because for my entire life I had avoided confrontation. I forgave quickly. I apologized even when I wasn't wrong. I made peace, but something inside me had changed. "This is my house." He looked stunned. "Mom." "No." I stood slowly. My chest still ached, my body still tired easily, but my voice remained steady. "You made decisions about my life without me." His eyes filled with tears. "I was trying to help." "You were trying to control." The room fell silent. For several seconds, he simply stared at me. Then anger returned. "You've chosen strangers over your own family." The words hurt, because I knew exactly who he meant. Denise, Elaine, people who had protected me. I looked directly at him. They treated me like I still belonged to myself. He had no answer. The argument grew louder. Ashley begged him to stop. Lauren cried. And eventually Denise arrived after I called her. She entered quietly. Marcus looked furious. "This is between family." Denise answered calmly. "Brianna asked me to come." For years I had watched difficult families in hospital rooms. I had often wondered how women my age found the strength to stand up for themselves. Now I understood. You do it because one day you realize silence costs more than conflict. Eventually Marcus left. Lauren followed. The front door closed. The house became quiet. Ashley remained. She sat beside me at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Do you hate me?" The question broke my heart. Because mothers almost never hate their children, even when they probably should. "No," she cried. "But I'm not ready to forgive." She nodded. "I understand." That night, after everyone had gone upstairs, I walked slowly into the living room. The moonlight entered through the front windows. I sat in Robert's chair. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. Not because the legal documents had protected me, not because the trust existed, not because of the receipt, but because I had finally said something I should have said long ago. No. And sometimes, for a woman who has spent her entire life taking care of everyone else, that single word becomes the beginning of healing. The next several days were strangely quiet. After Marcus left the house, the tension that had filled every room seemed to disappear. The silence should have felt lonely, but instead, it felt peaceful. For the first time since my surgery, I woke up without immediately worrying about who might enter my bedroom, what documents might appear, or what conversation might happen behind closed doors. I moved back upstairs permanently. The first night in my own bed, I barely slept. Not because of fear, because of memories. Robert had occupied the left side of the bed for 37 years. Even after his death, I often reached toward his side during the night. Now, lying there alone, I realized something. For months after Robert died, I had been afraid of loneliness. But loneliness and independence are not the same thing. I had forgotten that. The following Monday, Ashley came to visit. She arrived alone. No Marcus, no Lauren, No discussions about legal documents. She carried a small container of soup, the same recipe I had made for her when she was sick as a little girl. She stood quietly in the kitchen. I didn't know if you'd want to see me. I looked at my daughter. She seemed older, not physically, emotionally. Pain changes people. Sit down, I said. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ashley began crying. I keep replaying everything. I reached for my coffee. So do I. She looked at me. I should have stopped him. I nodded. Yes. She lowered her head. I was afraid he'd shut me out. From what? The family. I studied her carefully. Ashley had spent most of her life trying to keep peace. Even as a child, she hated arguments. When Marcus and his father fought, Ashley would sit quietly and cry. Now I realized she had done the same thing as an adult. She saw something wrong, but fear kept her silent. I never wanted the house, she whispered. I know. I swear. I believe you. She looked surprised. You do? Yes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then why are you still angry? Because trust once broken does not return simply because someone apologizes. I need time. She nodded. I understand. Before leaving, she stopped near the front door. Marcus wants to see you? My chest tightened. No. He says he's sorry. I looked toward the window. I'm not ready. She accepted that answer. And for the first time in weeks, someone in my family accepted one of my decisions without arguing. The following day, Chloe visited. She brought a small potted plant. I thought the kitchen needed something happy. I smiled. The girl had become my greatest source of comfort. We sat on the back porch. Autumn leaves covered part of the yard. The dogwood trees had begun losing their color. Mom cries every day, Chloe said. I looked at her. Your mother loves her family. She says she failed you. I thought carefully. No. But she's sad. I know. Chloe looked down. Uncle Marcus doesn't come to family dinners anymore. I felt sadness wash over me, because families rarely break all at once. They crack slowly, conversation by conversation, secret by secret, decision by decision. That evening, my phone rang. Marcus. I stared at the screen. The phone rang again and again. Finally, I answered. Hello? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then my son began crying. Not quietly, not politely, the deep, painful crying of someone whose world has collapsed. Mom, his voice broke. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. I had imagined this conversation many times. I thought I would feel satisfied. Instead, I felt exhausted. What happened? I asked. My business. I remained silent. The bank called. I suddenly understood. How bad is it? He took a deep breath. I may lose everything. There it was, the fear that had been hiding behind all the paperwork. Not greed alone, desperation. I didn't know what to do. I looked out the kitchen window. You could have talked to me. I was ashamed. That answer felt honest. I thought if the house was protected. The house wasn't yours to protect. He cried harder. I know. For several minutes, we simply listened to each other breathing. Finally, he asked, Can I come over? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted more time, but another part remembered a little boy who once ran into my arms after every failure. Tomorrow. Okay. The next afternoon, Marcus arrived alone. No Lauren. No paperwork. No attorney. Just my son. He looked exhausted, older. His shoulders seemed heavier. We sat in Robert's office. The same room where I had hidden the receipt. The same room where Robert had once taught Marcus how to balance a checkbook. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Marcus looked at his father's photograph. Dad would be disappointed. I answered honestly, yes. Tears filled his eyes. I disappointed you too. I remained quiet, because sometimes people need to say difficult things aloud. I thought I was fixing everything. He looked down, but really I was trying to save myself. The truth, simple, painful, necessary. I never wanted you dead. I felt tears forming. I know. I was scared. So was I. He looked at me. Of surgery. No. Of what? I swallowed. Of my own children. The words hit him like a physical blow. His face collapsed. He began crying again. I never wanted that. But that's what happened. For a long time, we sat quietly. Eventually, he asked, "Will you ever forgive me?" I looked around Robert's office. The books, the photographs, the Bible, the shelf where the receipt had rested. Forgiveness? People often think forgiveness happens in one moment. It doesn't. It happens in small steps, tiny decisions, repeated choices. I don't know yet. He nodded. I deserve that. When he left, he stopped at the front door. Mom. Yes, I never thanked you. For what? For everything. And suddenly, I realized something. For weeks, we had talked about money, the house, the will, the trust, the documents, but underneath all of it sat something much deeper. Fear, failure, shame. A son who felt like he had failed his family. A daughter who feared losing everyone. A widow who feared losing her voice. And a family that had forgotten how to talk honestly. That evening, I walked into Robert's office. I opened the Bible. The receipt was no longer hidden there. It now rested safely inside Elaine's files. Its job was finished. The little piece of paper had protected me. But now something else would determine the future. Not legal documents, not attorneys, not wills. Only whether a broken family could somehow learn to become a family again. And for the first time in many months, I allowed myself to believe that healing might still be possible. Winter arrived quietly that year. The leaves disappeared from the dogwood trees, and cold winds moved through the neighborhood that Robert and I had called home for nearly 4 decades. 3 months had passed since the meeting in Elaine's office. 3 months since the little receipt had changed everything. And 3 months since my family had begun learning how to live with the truth. Recovery from surgery continued slowly. My strength returned little by little. Some mornings I could walk through the neighborhood. Other days, my chest still ached. But emotionally, I had changed more than physically. I no longer apologized for my own decisions. I no longer explained every choice. And for the first time in many years, I began asking myself a simple question. What do I want women of my generation often spend decades caring for everyone else? We become wives, mothers, caregivers, nurses, problem solvers. And somewhere along the way, our own voices become quieter. My surgery had almost taken my life, but my recovery had returned my voice. Marcus called occasionally. The conversations remained short, polite, careful. He had sold part of his business. He was negotiating with the bank. Some debts remained. Others had been restructured. He no longer spoke about the house. He no longer mentioned inheritance. For now, we existed somewhere between love and distance. Ashley visited every weekend. Sometimes she brought groceries, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing except herself. One Saturday afternoon, we sat together, wrapping Christmas decorations. She held one of Robert's old ornaments, a small wooden angel he had carved years earlier. Dad would hate this. I looked up. What? The family? I smiled sadly. Your father believed people could change. She turned the ornament in her hands. Do you? I thought carefully. Yes. Even Marcus. Especially Marcus. She looked surprised. Why? Because broken people often make the worst decisions, and because mothers never completely stop seeing the children inside their grown sons. Christmas approached. For the first time since Robert died, I considered canceling our family gathering. The idea seemed easier. No arguments, no tension, no difficult conversations. But Chloe changed my mind. She arrived one afternoon carrying cookie dough. We're having Christmas. I laughed. We are. She nodded firmly. Grandpa would be angry if we didn't. I looked at her. She had become so much like Robert. Quiet strength, simple wisdom. A week before Christmas, Marcus appeared at my front door. He stood outside holding a cardboard box. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. The box contained old photographs, family albums, letters, pictures Robert had kept inside his office. I found these in my garage. I looked through them. Birthday parties, school graduations, camping trips. Robert teaching Marcus to drive. Ashley sitting on my lap. Chloe as a baby, our entire life. Marcus sat quietly. I've been cleaning. I nodded. After several minutes, he spoke. The business is gone. I looked at him. Gone? I sold everything. His voice sounded empty. The bank took most of it. I felt sadness. Despite everything, no mother enjoys seeing her child fail. What will you do? He shrugged. Start over. The room became quiet. Finally, he looked at me. I think I understand something now. What? He swallowed. I was so afraid of losing everything that I forgot what everything actually was. I looked at him. My family. Tears filled his eyes. I almost lost that instead. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The winter sunlight entered through the windows. Dust moved slowly through the air. The house felt peaceful. I've been seeing a counselor. That surprised me. For what? Everything. His voice broke. Dad dying. The business. The debt. The surgery. He lowered his head. And what I did to you. I realized then that Marcus had finally stopped defending himself. For months, he explained, justified, argued. Now he simply accepted responsibility. That was different, very different. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at him carefully. Why not? Because I don't deserve it. I thought about Robert, about marriage, about raising children, about mistakes. And I remembered something my husband often said. People who deserve forgiveness rarely ask for it. People who ask for it usually need it. I stood slowly, walked toward the bookshelf, opened Robert's Bible, the place where the receipt had once been. The space was empty now. I turned toward my son. There was a reason I kept that receipt. He listened quietly. Not because of money. Not because of the house. Because I needed proof that my voice still mattered. His eyes filled with tears. I took that away from you. Yes. He nodded. And I don't know how to fix it. I sat beside him. You don't fix trust. He looked at me. You rebuild it. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. For the first time in many years, the entire family gathered. Ashley, Chloe, Marcus, Lauren. Even Denise joined us for dinner. The atmosphere felt careful, not uncomfortable, just honest. Nobody discussed the will. Nobody mentioned the trust. Nobody talked about the house. Instead, we talked about Robert, his terrible singing, his love of baseball, his habit of fixing things that weren't broken. At one point, Chloe stood and raised her glass. To Grandpa. Everyone smiled. Then she added something unexpected. And to Grandma. I looked at her. She smiled. For staying. Silence filled the room, because everyone understood what she meant. Staying alive, staying strong, staying herself. After dinner, Marcus approached me. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first sentence read, I forgot that you were still my mother before I started treating you like my responsibility. I folded the paper carefully. My eyes filled with tears. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in Robert's office. Snow had begun falling outside, very lightly. The house felt warm, peaceful, different. The legal battle had ended months earlier. The receipt had done its job. The truth had been revealed. But I finally understood something. The little piece of paper had never been the real inheritance. The real inheritance was voice, choice, dignity, and the right to remain the author of your own life. As I looked at Robert's photograph one final time before bed, I smiled, because for the first time since my surgery, I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like myself again, and perhaps very slowly, my family was beginning to find itself too. Spring returned to Atlanta, almost exactly 1 year after my surgery. The dogwood trees Robert planted had begun blooming again. White petals covered parts of the backyard, and for the first time in a very long time, I stood outside without pain in my chest. Recovery had taken longer than I expected. Not the surgery, the family. People often assume the body heals more slowly than the heart. In my experience, the opposite is true. My heart had needed far more time. By March, Marcus had found a new job. It paid less. He sold his large house and moved into a smaller one across town. Lauren returned to work full-time. Their lives became simpler, harder in some ways, healthier in others. Ashley continued visiting every weekend. Our relationship slowly began to feel natural again. We planted flowers together, we baked pies. Sometimes we talked about what happened, sometimes we didn't. Healing does not require discussing every wound every day. Some wounds heal quietly. One Saturday morning, Elaine called. I have something for you. A few days later, I visited her office. She handed me a small envelope. Inside was the original receipt. The faded paper had become slightly worn from handling. I smiled. I suppose I should frame it. Elaine laughed. You'd be surprised how many clients keep things like this. I looked down at it. A receipt, less than 5 inches long. The paper that protected my voice. The paper that reminded everyone that Brianna Green still belonged to herself. As I prepared to leave, Elaine asked one final question. "What will you do with the house?" I looked out the window. "The same thing I always planned." "And what is that?" "Live in it," she smiled. Good answer. The following month, Chloe graduated from high school. The ceremony took place on a warm evening. Families filled the football stadium. Cameras flashed. Children became adults. As Chloe walked across the stage, she looked directly toward me. She smiled, and afterward, she ran into my arms. "Grandma, I did it." "Yes, you did." She held my hands. "I couldn't have done it without you." I laughed. "You certainly could have." She shook her head. "No." Later that evening, while everyone gathered for photographs, Chloe pulled me aside. "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" She looked nervous. "I want to study social work." I smiled. "That's wonderful." She looked toward the family. After everything that happened, I realized how many older people don't have anyone protecting them. My eyes filled with tears, because perhaps something good had emerged from our pain. Perhaps the next generation had learned something the previous one forgot. A few weeks later, Marcus invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. The restaurant was small and quiet. Neither of us knew exactly how to begin. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket. He removed an envelope. Inside was a letter. "I wrote this months ago." I unfolded the paper. The first sentence read, "I spent so much time worrying about inheriting your house that I forgot to honor the woman who built it." My eyes blurred. The letter continued. He apologized, not for being caught, not for losing, but for making me feel invisible, for making me feel old, for making me feel powerless. When I finished reading, he looked at me. "I can't undo it." "No, I know that." The restaurant became quiet. People talked around us. Plates clinked. Life continued. I was angry after Dad died. I looked at him. "Why?" "Because he left." The answer surprised me. "I know that's irrational." "Grief often is." He stared at the table. "Then you got sick." His voice trembled. "And suddenly, I thought I was losing both of you." I listened. But instead of admitting I was scared, I tried to control everything. There it was. The truth. Simple, painful, human. I reached across the table. For the first time in nearly a year, I took my son's hand. "I forgive you." He began crying. So did I. Forgiveness did not erase what happened. It did not change the documents. It did not erase the meetings. It did not remove the pain. But forgiveness allowed us to move forward carrying less weight. Months later, on a warm summer evening, the entire family gathered at my house. The same house, the same kitchen, the same dining room, the same backyard. Nothing had been sold. Nothing had been taken. Chloe prepared dinner. Ashley brought dessert. Marcus repaired the broken fence Robert had planned to fix years earlier. Lauren helped in the kitchen. At sunset, everyone sat outside. The dogwood trees moved gently in the wind. I looked around the table. The people who had hurt me. The people who had disappointed me. The people I still loved. Family is strange that way. Sometimes the people who wound us are the same people who eventually help us heal. After dinner, Chloe asked a question. "Grandma, what are you going to do with the house someday?" Everyone became quiet. I smiled. Someday is not today. Everyone laughed. Then I added, when my time comes, the house will take care of itself. Marcus looked at me. And until then, I looked around the yard. At Robert's trees, at my grandchildren, at the porch we built together. Until then, it belongs exactly where it always has. With me. That night, after everyone left, I walked into Robert's office one final time. His photograph still stood on the desk. The Bible remained on the shelf. The room looked almost exactly as it had before my surgery. I sat in his chair. Outside, the crickets sang. The house creaked softly. And for the first time in many years, I spoke aloud. We made it. Perhaps Robert heard me. Perhaps he didn't. But I realized something important. The real inheritance was never the house. It was dignity, voice, choice, and the courage to remind the people you love that your life still belongs to you. One small receipt had protected my future, but one difficult year had given me something even more valuable: myself.